Hello and welcome to the Hindu's COP29 tracker. Today, as COP29 unfolds in Baku, Azerbaijan, the stakes for climate action are higher than ever before. Now, in its third day, the conference is confronting significant hurdles in its mission to secure ambitious climate finance commitments. Despite widespread calls for urgent action, negotiations have hit roadblocks around the new collective quantified goal for climate finance, with developing countries demanding trillions of dollars in annual support to tackle climate impacts. As our viewers might recall, this is the pivot from the $100 billion annual pledge that the developed world had made it at COP in Copenhagen in 2009. And now, India, for instance, had said that it is too little, and in fact had suggested something over over a trillion every year. But there have been significant calls, particularly by the G77 and China, that it should actually be somewhere close to $1.3 trillion annually. Key negotiators from the global south, such as the African group, like-minded developing countries, the G77, have insisted on clearer, more direct commitments, arguing that the current draft is unwieldy and difficult to negotiate. In response, they have asked for a streamlined, thematically organized document to facilitate progress. Now, to discuss all of this, which is ongoing and in what appears to be quite a difficult COP in terms of outcomes, we have with us Aditya V. Bahadur, who's the director of Red Cross Red Crescent Climate Center. He works out of Delhi and a long-time climate expert, particularly on urban resilience. Aditya, who is right now at Baku as part of COP29 negotiations, is joining us. Thank you so much for making time, Aditya. Despite your busy schedule. So, what is this growing divide that we have between the developed and developing countries on climate finance goals? Firstly, why is it, despite the fact that in the past couple of COPs at least, we did witness some major commitments by developed countries. They did acknowledge that what they've been giving is too little. In 2022, for the first time, we crossed that $100 billion threshold that they had set out way back in 2009. But why is it why have we hit a stalemate? And secondly, in what way will this NCQG, this new collective quantified goal, be significantly different from the 100 billion goal?
Thanks, Kunal, and thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak with you. As you rightly said, I am in Baku, and as always, there's some reason for excitement, some reason for disappointment, as with every COP. Let me answer your question in two parts. The NCQG is going to be qualitatively different from the targets that were set before for a couple of reasons. One is the quantum of finance that we're at least talking about and that we're at least bringing to the table is markedly more than we've ever talked about in the past, right? You mentioned the figures yourself. Anywhere from 1 trillion to 2 trillion is the figure being talked about. Now, let's remember, while that is a move in the right direction, it is crucial to also recall that we're not only talking, it's not like a donor is going to provide these $2 trillion to developing countries. This 2 trillion or 1 trillion or whatever the final figure is will be made up of a different blocks. A part of it will be grant financing from international donors to developing countries, but a large proportion of it will be the domestic countries' own resources that will be kind of mobilized towards this goal. Now, to answer the second part of your second part of your question, there is disagreement on a number of different factors with this very complex negotiation. Let's look at the four key components, which is what, how, where, who, and there's disagreement across all these parameters at the moment. So when we talk about what, in terms of what the money will be spent on, there's disagreement. One of the key axes of disagreements is on whether loss and damage payments will be dispersed as part of whatever the goal is that is finally agreed. Some countries are
Just,
saying
just,
that.
just, just to interrupt there, you're trying to say that the NCQG might subsume the loss and damage within that? I mean, since you're
Correct.
saying that there'll be, okay, I see. Yeah, go
Correct.
ahead.
And a set of countries is for that, a set of countries is against that. There is no agreement on it, which is vitally important. And primarily, the countries that are batting for it are saying that at the moment, the amount of money that has been allocated for the loss and damage fund is quite small, and the NCQG provides them a pathway to enhance the level of financing for loss and damage. Other
Right.
people are saying that we need to ensure that finance for adaptation within the total sum is ring fenced appropriately so that all the money doesn't only go to mitigating the emission of greenhouse gases, but to helping poor and vulnerable communities adapt to these changes. So there's lots of debate on what the money will be spent on. There's also
Right.
debate on who, right? Who is going to receive the money, who is going to contribute the money, and that is still a very active axis of debate, discussion, disagreement, whatever words you want to use. Um, and there are all kinds of formulas being proposed on who we should determine needs to contribute to this money. Some people are saying let's look at historical emissions as one of the parameters to determine who contributes to the pot. Others are saying let's look at absolute emissions. Someone else is saying let's look at per capita emissions. So again, there's disagreement on who is going to contribute to the pot. And I mean, I guess there's less disagreement on who's going to access it, but that's still also to be ironed out. When we come to when, the timeline is also not clear at the moment. There is a block of countries saying that we need to commit to short-term 5-year time horizon when this will be mobilized and dispersed. Others are saying that that's too short. Let's at least agree to a 10-year period when the money will be dispersed year on year. People are saying that the problem with a 10-year period might be that whatever sum you might decide on at the moment might seem quite little,
By the
after a
time,
few years.
yeah, that's right.
So you should have a 5-year
Particularly
break and then
considering
revise.
inflation and so many other cycles, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
But the people who are arguing for a 10-year time horizon are saying that 5 years is too little, and then we have to restart this whole process, restart all the negotiations after spending so much time on it. So the when is
When?
is also really being debated at the moment. So yeah, I do want to acknowledge that having done this whole thing now on the climate policy side for almost 18 years, it's easy to think that, nothing is happening, no progress is happening. Just the fact that there is now no debate that $100 billion a year is too little, I feel like, is a substantial achievement that needs to be celebrated. The fact that even the most conservative people arguing for the NCQG are putting the figure at least $500 billion is a substantial uh, um, increase in the quantum of financing that people are acknowledging that is needed. So incremental progress is being made because these are consensual processes that aim to generate buy-in from different countries. It takes time, it's complex, and we have to have the patience to wait for the outcome. Unfortunately, I realize with the climate crisis, we don't have endless amounts of time. So I mean, I'm keen to see an outcome as well.
Right. Actually, so you've said quite a few things. So let's actually unpack some of that, and that's a brilliant overview. Thanks for giving us that overview. Firstly, you made a huge distinction, which appears to be, in fact, almost counterproductive for those who have worked really hard towards the fruition of the loss and damage fund, which happened at Sharm el Sheikh, right, where there was an agreement that the climate crisis is already here. Several countries, particularly developing and least developed small island nations, are already beginning to face that, and the implications are actually long term, and the climate change is and hence loss and damage because it's irreversible. Um, so you're firstly saying that this new collective quantifiable goal is going to actually subsume this entire thing, which for which has been debated for decades now. I mean, at least years before becoming reality. And this COP is supposed to be operationalizing it. So there's already, what shall I say, a disagreement as to whether it should be a standalone fund, a standalone entity, and as opposed to something that needs to be part of the NCQG. Secondly, you are saying that the NCQG does not have to be anymore just the developed world, but in fact, as you said, a basket of money from various entities, which can be multilateral development banks. In fact, they've issued a statement that they would be upping the extent of lending that they will do. It can be part of loans. It can also be developed countries giving, say, their own portion of loans or whatever they may want to give. Sum and substance of what I'm saying, is that correct to some extent?
Correct. So on your first point, I don't think that's what I was trying to say, and I don't think that's where the discussions are heading. It's actually quite unclear, but I don't think there's any danger of what was agreed in Sharm el-Sheikh being rolled back. It's just that how the fund will be replenished. Is there going to be a separate stream of funding? Is that going to be part of NCQG? That's the bit that's being discussed. On your second point, you're absolutely right.
Right. Okay. And so this would, on the second point, this would actually mean that, I mean, some may say that this is a way of the developed world sort of reneging on bearing the historical responsibility of funding for climate emissions, which is historically, which has largely been emitted by the major countries. Of course, today China is the largest emitter, but then historically it's been the US and then Western Europe. Some may say that this is a sort of a way of them reneging on it. Secondly, it could also mean that the operationalization of this new funding process can actually get delayed. And like you rightly said, we have very little time to be delaying any further. But the third thing that appears to interesting to me is that the time period that you said, the 5 years or the 10 years, are there any conversations where, much like how in budget planning there is a sort of a, let's say, a dearness allowance, if you will, which is put in, which allows for inflation and other factors to be to be subsumed, and which allows for a certain dynamic way of budgeting. Are we seeing those kind of conversations as well? And the next question would be, from what I understand of COP, and you've been attending quite a few, there's a lot of jostling that goes on, not just in the main arena, but in a lot of subsets of conversations, and a lot of groups like your own who come in, talk about the work that they've been doing, and then they really try to impress upon the decision makers, which is the governments that have actually assembled there. What sort of conversations are animating people there at this point, considering that several of the top heads are actually not there? That's usually one of the measure of whether a COP is going to be successful or not.
So let me take the issues that you raised one by one. Choosing to see the glass half full, I would not argue that Annex 1 countries or the developed countries are reneging on their commitments. I think the question and debate at the moment is who, apart from them, will be contributing to the pot, what the quantum of contribution will be, how the pot will be constituted. And I think that's a substantial improvement from where we were even a few years ago. So that I'm choosing to be optimistic here, Kunal.
Yeah.
On the second point, yes. So I think there are people might disagree with me, but to me there are always three important tracks to any COP. There is a formal negotiations track where government negotiators that are appointed by national governments from around the world meet and talk about and agree on a range of decisions. This is a very technical process where drafts of decisions are projected onto screens and people kind of review them and agree on them. Having been part of some of these negotiations, it can be quite an interesting process where sometimes you can have a 20-minute disagreement on the placement of a comma, on the capitalization of a letter, because that might change the degree to which a particular party is committed. By party, I mean a country is committed to doing a particular action.
Right.
So it's a very painstaking process. And it isn't a command and control system. It is a deliberate and decide system. So everything takes quite a lot of time. So that's one track. Um, the second track is where everyone who has a stake in the climate policy game and who is interested and does work on it and has been formally invited by the UN to be part of a conference of parties, a COP, is given, or they can opt actually for a space where they can host a range of discussions, talk about their work, display their publications, invite people into debate. And so that is always an extremely lively part of the Conference of Parties, where accredited entities and observer organizations have what we call pavilions. And this is a very stimulating space where, at any given point of time, that I would imagine at least 50 or 60 parallel sessions happening on all facets of climate change processes across mitigation, adaptation, loss, and damage. All kinds of new ideas are discussed. And it's a place of sometimes frustration, but largely of inspiration. And you see people from all over the world, and in many times in their traditional dresses. Over the last many COPs, I've seen a very clear uptick in the number of indigenous peoples that are being represented at the COP. And so you see people from all over the world wearing all kinds of, fantastic local costumes, talking in their different languages, talking about the cultures that they come from within this second track, yeah, around these pavilions. The third
Right.
track is where it's more of an open space where the private sector and other civil society organizations can set up a stall and talk about what they're doing. You don't need to have an official invite to the COP to be part of that. You can actually, anyone off the street can essentially go to that arena, meet a whole bunch of interesting people doing all kinds of incredible things. Just as an aside, a lot of technology actors that are making incredible progress in solving the climate crisis using new tools of artificial intelligence, big data, usually put up their stalls in that area and talk about all the frontiers that they're breaking with these interesting new technologies. I mean, sorry to indulge myself, but also just to tell you a little bit about it. COP has also, for us, the people who work on climate change, become a space for meeting old friends. You see people
Right.
hugging each other all the time. People meet each other after years. So it is, apart from all the serious business of arguing over
Yeah.
commas and capitals and having interesting debates and sessions, it's also a fantastic opportunity once a year to meet your global community of practice and feel like you're part of a global movement to solve this very important problem.
Right, and I remember, if I'm not wrong, a couple of COPs, a couple of years ago at was it COP 20? When at the height of COVID, and especially at the time when there was so much discussion about carbon footprint by aviation and etc. COP usually also has a large gathering of protesters and activists and etc. As you said, there was this criticism that it lands up being more of a party event than really serious business. But I suppose both happen at the same time. So we are almost 20 minutes into this, and this is an interactive session. So we are asking our viewers who join us in their thousands. Actually, we've had a great response, particularly to our COP tracker, to chat with our experts whom we have. Well, rather, at least put your questions through, and we would be taking it to them. So if there's anyone watching this and wants to ask a question based on the conversation that we've had with Aditya, please do so. And our team, our back end team, usually relays it as well. But let me just continue if there are no questions right now. Aditya, the other thing which appears to be animating many people at this particular COP has been that the carbon market has actually taken shape in a manner of speaking. There's a sort of a base, if you will, that's been created, but just how this might affect the developing countries, and is it really meaningful and enforceable in a way which is measurable? Because emission, or is it another case where emissions might just be shifted from where it's counted to and is it going to allow just a sort of a market mechanism where shifting of emissions take place rather than actually reducing it?
Yeah, Kunal, I think just to be clear, I lead the Red Cross Red Crescent Climate Center, and we concern ourselves exclusively with climate adaptation, which is helping poor and vulnerable communities deal with the impacts of climate change. So we don't really do that much work on the mitigation side. However, I have my personal view on the carbon market. I mean, while I applaud all attempts to try and find a market-oriented solution to the mitigation issue, I think there are lots of dimensions around carbon markets that still need to be ironed out. There are big equity concerns. There are big concerns around how do you account and track the degree to which emissions might be abated. And there is this huge issue that you've talked about on the degree to which it is making a dent in overall abatement of greenhouse gases across the world.
Right. Okay. So let me then come to something that you have sort of worked on for quite some time, which is really important and may not necessarily be part of, or maybe it is part of COP negotiations, and you can tell me since you're there, is urban resilience and adaptation. We have already witnessed extreme weather events across the world in the past year. In fact, cyclone or Hurricane Helene, as they call it in the United States, which hit the southern coast, southeastern coast, has devastated communities, uprooted, literally ravaged cities across there. There have been unprecedented rains and flooding in Spain. In India, we've had some cyclones. There have been cyclones which have, in fact, even affected Gujarat. The Arabian Sea, which generally doesn't witness cyclones, just witnessed something after about 4 decades, and that might be partly climate-led. But I do understand from climate scientists that it's a rare event which can also happen. But extreme weather is here to stay by all measure. Everybody agrees with that. Given that, and given that our developing country cities are very densely populated, what kind of measures must, say, cities like India in the tropics take to mitigate this extreme rainfall? I mean, for instance, where I am in Chennai, we've already witnessed in the past decade some extreme rainfall events that have really devastated our communities. 2015, if you remember, and then more recently in 2021. So what is it that we must be doing and our policymakers must be doing to adapt?
Sure. Yeah, Kunal. The thing is that for the first time in the history of the world, more people now live in cities than in non-urban areas. Um, and
Right.
almost 95% of all cities are located along the coast or along the river, and these are locations that are highly prone to being impacted by climate-induced shocks and stresses like disasters, right? But the challenge is that basically issues of urban resilience by and large you don't figure anywhere in these international climate negotiations. um, a group of us who feel passionately about this have been championing this cause, but urban contexts in particular and their challenges that are quite discrete don't find prominence in the declarations that come out of many of the COPs. I think even Paris only has one small, the Paris Declaration also has only one small mention. So it's quite strange that most of the world lives in cities. Cities are
And yet
highly
we don't quite
exposed.
have, yeah, yeah,
Correct. And let's also not forget that people who live in the world cities are also extremely vulnerable. 30% of everyone who lives in a city lives in a slum. And these are areas with
right,
poor basic services, poor access to good governance, a low financial base. And therefore they don't really have the capacity to withstand shocks and stresses coming from climate change. 750 million people that live in cities across the world earn less than $2 a day. So
right.
it's a huge problem.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, for
and
instance, which you might have been reading this in the news lately. There's every few years something that comes up is a sort of a city river cleanup. It happened in Madras. It's happened multiple times along the Kuam, along the Adyar, and particularly after the 2015 rains and floods. People were attempted to be evacuated from the Adyar. Now it's ongoing in Hyderabad along the Musi River, which generally hasn't flooded for years, but in fact has faced more frequent flooding in the past 5 years, I would say. And there are people who are sort of pointing to the fact that this might be because of climate change. The government is trying to evict them. There are about 1 lakh people who, as you pointed out, the poor, not only is it 1/3 of the global population, but they also live in the most climate vulnerable areas, like along the river, where or sometimes on the river bed. So how do
yeah,
you how do we and they also don't want to. We in fact have been carrying stories on this on the Musi River in Hyderabad. How do we account for the fact that they don't want to be far away from their livelihoods either? Because several of them are conservancy workers, construction workers, a lot of blue collar workers who don't have modes of transport which from far flung places, because whatever the government is proposing is really 30 kilometers or 40 kilometers away from where they work, and our public transport is still not robust enough, let's say, to have to be accommodating them. So how do we
yeah.
account for their vulnerability?
I'm going to stick my neck out and say that the evict, demolish, relocate approach to tackling informal settlers uh, has by and large failed and has been the source of immense amounts of injustice across the world. And beginning with South America, particularly Brazil, I think there's a growing consensus amongst all technical experts that slum upgradation is the way to go as opposed to relocation. Um, and I
Right.
think focused particularly on climate resilience, there are some incredibly unique experiments on how you can ensure that people who live in informal settlements are less prone to suffering the impacts of climate change. Let me give you one small example from Cape Town, where in a low-lying area, a slum, a large number of people living in a slum community were highly prone to different kinds of climate-induced shocks and stresses. And so the government first thought what they'll do is move them all out to the outskirts of the city. But sensibly, through community engagement and understanding the problems of the community and what they wanted, they actually decided what was much simpler to do is build these brick platforms that raise the plinth of the houses on which the slums were constructed, allowing them to keep living in the place that they did with much more reduced vulnerability to climate impacts. So sometimes simple solutions, innovative solutions can emerge when you have a genuine dialogue with communities, which is complex, expensive, takes time, but delivers much more effective and durable results if your intention is to help people better withstand the impacts of climate change.
Excellent. I think that's sort of like sums up what must take place here as well. But I think at the end of the end of the half-hour discussion that we've been having these past few days. I'm just once again going to. It doesn't appear to be that we have any questions. Just several comments. So I mean, some of them are also interesting to read. Kerala landslides. Somebody has mentioned that the extreme events include the landslides at Wayanad, for instance, in Kerala. In India, we have to make this is a real issue, which is climate change. People aren't aware of the serious implications of the climate change. They need to be made aware by the government side. Anuj says, Varalakshmi says it's even raining in November because of global warming. In fact, it started raining in October here in Chennai, and we've not usually had that. So yeah, not many questions, but I think there's more engagement that we already see from people here, but maybe it's not, and it's begun seeping into the politics of the country, not in as effective a way as it's probably happened elsewhere. But on that note, and letting you be more optimistic, Aditya, and maybe continue with the negotiations there. Thank you so much for making time to be part of the Hindus COP29 tracker. And we hope to have you again if you're there for a little bit longer at some point, if you can make time. And to our viewers and those who've been commenting, thank you so much for watching. We'll be back with another episode of the COP29 tracker soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.